Hi, welcome. Thank you all for joining us. For those of you who haven't met PASA, we are a network of farmers, food system professionals, and change makers. My name is Tabitha. My work with PASA is primarily focused in our food shed mapping project. And we also have with us on the call today, PASA's policy strategist, Sarah Nicholas. Sarah regularly holds these listening sessions to focus on issues that matter to you, to hear your stories, ideas, and field-tested solutions. We invite you to send Sarah an email and let her know what issues matter to you. Today's discussion is a collaboration and includes representatives from the Pennsylvania Department of Education, the Pennsylvania Department of Ag, the Pennsylvania Farm to School Network, the School Nutrition Association of Pennsylvania, and Feeding Pennsylvania. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers today. Fonda Ramp, the State Director of Child Nutrition Programs at the Pennsylvania Department of Education, Karen Long Earl, Director of the Bureau of Food Distribution at the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, Nicole Melia, Food Service Supervisor at Great Valley School District, and Tom Mazer, Director of Agricultural Partnerships at Feeding PA. A big thank you to all of our speakers for joining us here today. We are especially grateful to Tom, who reached out to Sarah and started this conversation. At the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, Congress gave USDA the authority to issue nationwide child nutrition waivers to increase food access and address operational challenges, allowing school nutrition programs, local governments, and nonprofits to adapt as necessary to address changes such as school closures. These waivers are set to expire on June 30th. The waivers have been critical in ensuring Pennsylvania's schools and community-based providers have had the means to feed children during the school year and into the summer months. Tom reached out to Sarah as he began to dig into the expiring USDA waivers and find out what it would mean for the more than 443,000 children in Pennsylvania now at risk of hunger. That's 1 of every 6 children in Pennsylvania. These waivers have provided critical support for those children. We're excited to be in conversation with the folks who are working on the front lines of this issue today. Please share your questions for our speakers in the Q&A section. We look forward to answering those throughout when applicable and also at the Q&A session before the session ends. Let's jump right into it. I'm going to ask Nicole and Vonda, can you share with us a brief update on the status of those waivers as we get closer to that June 30th expiration date?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Nicole, I can kick it off if you'd like, and then you can just add on to anything that I say. But for the last 2.5 years, schools have been operating under numerous amounts of waivers. We were up over, we stopped counting actually, but we were up over 100 waivers over the last 2 years. Those waivers expired June 30th, as Tabitha had just explained. So we went from waivers that allowed schools and summer operations to feed all kids for free in any area of the state, regardless if they were normally eligible or not for free meals. The ability to feed children non-congregate meals, so parents could come and pick up meals for their kids. Kids could could pick up meals and take them off-site. Our programs are regulated congregate meal programs, and so that's why those waivers were necessary. That the regulations specifically say the meals must be handed to the children and they must be eaten on-site. Not in those exact words, but that's the intent and the meaning of the regulations. So the waivers also covered the ability for schools to have flexibility with the types of meals that they serve. If you're familiar with our program, any of our child nutrition programs at all, they are highly regulated. Nutrition is a very important component of the program. We want children, regardless of their age, to have access to healthy meals, not just just not just food, but we want, it's important that they have access to healthy food. So there are strict nutrition standards in the programs, but over the last 2 years, it's been difficult with the vast array of supply chain issues. So the flexibility for meal pattern requirements was definitely a very important factor. And one of the other very important things that occurred over the last year since July 1 was that participants were receiving the highest rate of reimbursement that they could possibly receive. All of that goes back to normal as of July 1, meaning that for summer operations, only sites that are can qualify as being eligible to participate in the program can participate in the summer programs, can participate. The meal reimbursement for there's 2 types of summer programs. One is through the schools, and it's called a seamless summer option, where only schools can participate. Another is the traditional summer meals program. That program is traditionally has a higher reimbursement rate. So, but if schools participating in the seamless summer, we'll go back to the regular reimbursement rate. And then in the school year, students will go back to free and reduced and paid eligibility status like they normally would prior to COVID. So if a child is not determined to be free for school meals, then the parent will need to submit an application to determine if the child is eligible otherwise for free meals, or maybe if not free meals, maybe reduced price meals. That in itself will be a challenge because parents haven't had to apply for 2 full school years, and some parents just new to the school system are not familiar with the application process at all. So if you have a kindergartner or first grader, you know nothing about applying for free meals or reduced price meals. You just know that you get them and you can go pick them up. So parents of young school age children, it's definitely going to be a learning curve for those parents. And then, as busy parents, we forget 2 years ago was a long time ago. And, you forget how it used to be, or you may miss the communications of, hey, we're going back to normal. So at a time when, inflation is very high and supply chain is still quite challenging for schools and child nutrition program operators like summer sites, those waivers are going away, except for the fact that the state had the opportunity to apply for some waivers. USDA can only approve waivers. I'm sorry, let me just, the better way to say that is USDA cannot approve waivers for specific things, being anything that impacts the cost of the program and anything that touches the nutrition standards of the program. So we had the ability as a state to ask for some waivers to extend into as of July 1. Those waivers are limited to very specific situations, though. So we did get approval to use non-congregate meals, parent pickup, and mealtime waivers, and they all go hand in hand with non-congregate meals, because if you don't have a non-congregate meal, you don't need parent pickup. So so a school or a summer organization that's providing meals can ask for approval to serve non-congregate meals if that meal site is normally operating in person, but the meal site has to shut down because of a COVID outbreak. So we're experiencing a very large learning curve and communication challenge in trying to get schools and organizations ready for this summer, in that it's not, you can't just serve non-congregate meals just because COVID still is out there and exists. You have to be operating an in-person operation, and it's temporarily shut down as a result of COVID. So Nicole, if I missed anything or you have a different perspective, feel free to fill in the gaps there.
Yeah, so I think you touched on a lot of the big picture things that we're really looking at as a food service director here in Pennsylvania. We utilized from the day we shut down, I think we shut down March 13th, 2020 now, I guess it was. And you know, we utilized we did meal bundles, had lines of families for pickup. We utilized almost all the waivers, and because of the supply chain issues that we experienced, we definitely utilized the meal pattern waivers. So we're definitely going to feel the loss of that. And one of the biggest areas I think where Pennsylvania families are going to feel the loss is the decrease in the number of summer meal programs that are going to be able to operate. In a district like mine, I'm very grateful because, and we're very lucky, we have some ESSERS and ESSERS funds. I'm not 100% sure what the acronym is for that or what that stands for, but it's emergency state relief funds maybe. But we have some ESSERS funds that we're able to still be able to provide meals over the summer. And I was able to qualify one of my summer programs under the summer food service program to be able to run for 2 weeks. So we really had to get creative to be able to continue meal programming over the summer. I don't have any real area eligible locations in my district, so everything has to be enrolled and certified that way. So you're definitely going to see a lot of the summer meal programs that used to be available last year and the year before just not be here. So, and one of the things that I think is going to be the greatest impact for parents when they come back to school and their kids come back to school in the 22-23 school year is that the lack of these waivers is going to result in potentially higher meal prices when their children come to the register to purchase breakfast or lunch. Or many schools are also making the decision not to raise prices from the 19-20 school year, which could mean that their food service fund is operating at a loss. And the question really is, how long can you operate at a loss? And how high can your meal prices go? So that's kind of what the concern is. We are looking at increased food costs of almost 20%. The paper goods supplies are going up tremendously. From a 19-20 pricing, we've seen 150% increase on some items if we can get them. So those are things that are really going to play a role in what the students are going to experience when they're in the schools. And, you know, for a school like mine, we're low eligibility for free and reduced price meals. So we're going to try to offset our potential losses by selling a la carte items and snacks and beverages and things like that. And historically throughout this school year, snacks, specifically like bagged chips and pretzels and those type of snacks have been very hard to get due to supply chain issues. So that's going to be a concern. I think in general, as we go into this next school year, the waivers really allowed us to have flexibility in the meal patterning and in what we could purchase. As we go back to lower reimbursement rates, the concern really is that we're going to be watching our dollars and cents a lot more. Having the increased reimbursement rates allowed us to bring in product that may have been more expensive, but we were able to do it because we had a cushion of the higher reimbursement rates. That's not going to be a possibility next year. So I'm really concerned about, you know, quality of food suffering and those kind of things, especially if the supply chain doesn't stabilize itself soon. So I think that just kind of gives you a picture of what could be happening when you go to look at your school meal program.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. Nicole, we had talked in a previous conversation about some long-term planning and what those requests might look like, what the backstops look like so that we can better prepare to meet these fluctuations in funding and programs. What does that look like for you, big picture, long-term?
It's hard to say. I would say there's so much flexibility. When we talk about kind of the backstops, like how to stop things from like continued losses in the food service funds and supply chain issues, like it really is a question, and food service directors are asking themselves all the time, how do we get out of this? What's the end of this? We've been going through it for going on almost 3 years now, and it's just continued. I think the waivers and the anticipation of the extension of the waivers really gave us a little bit of a comfort zone of knowing, like, okay, we've gone through 1 year of what this looks like. We could go through another year of what this looks of. We know what to anticipate next year. So there was comfort in that, in knowing, like, okay, we have some cushions, we have some meal pattern cushions. So when the waivers did not get extended, there was some real concern of going into another school year with another drastic change. And this is coming from many school years. I had once, 2 years ago, they changed to free meals the day school started. Last year we had suppliers back out 2 weeks before school started. So going into this school year, I'm hoping that I can start planning now, and it's going to look like I think it's going to look like, but there's going to be significant challenges. I'm hoping, I keep thinking from a bigger picture standpoint. And I think this was something that SNAPA and myself, we kind of had talked about. We hoped that the waivers would have been extended 1 more year, and then the child nutrition programs would have been reauthorized, so that we would have had some clear goals in how to go back. We were hoping for reauthorization in this school year, and that did not happen. Had that have happened, we would have had a year to train and learn and understand it and then go into it. But that did not happen. So we're just kind of feeling the concern of another year with a lot of changes.
I don't want to monopolize the conversation from the other speakers, but I just want to add to what Nicole just talked about there, and that even prior to COVID, school nutrition program operators, all child nutrition program operators, whether you're talking child care, whether you're talking the summer meals, are the most price conscientious food operators that you will probably ever meet. They operate on very slim budgets. And I just want to highlight that the child nutrition programs, the reimbursements that the operators receive, reimbursements are not intended to fully operate the program. And that's something that has sort of really gotten away from, over the years, over not many years, that the reimbursement provided by the federal government is to supplement the operation of the programs, not fully reimburse the programs. And what that has done is forced schools like Great Valley to have to sell a la carte foods to be self-sustaining. And that is, I think that's really a message that we need to make sure gets communicated, is that these are child nutrition programs, and school food services should not be responsible for sustaining themselves. This really is a bigger picture, and it's the community, it's the school, it's whoever is involved really has to help sustain these programs, not not Nicole as the food service director. And so if these programs are important enough for our children, then we need to figure out a way to sustain them without having to depend on a la carte foods. And the other thing I wanted to just add is that, obviously in relationship to that, the margins that distributors and manufacturers are working in whenever they work with the child nutrition programs are very slim, and it's not exactly attractive for a distributor or manufacturer to want to do business with schools. There has to be a motivation there for them, like a moral motivation for them when they can, their profit margins are much higher in the private sector. So I think that's something that really has to be looked at, and we'll probably touch on this later. But Nicole mentioned about they had a huge, almost catastrophic event happen at the beginning of last school year. We're dealing with another huge issue of a vendor pulling out of the business and leaving organizations high and dry with no food to provide children in areas that very much need to provide free meals to children. So I think you're going to get to that later, so I'll touch on that later, Tabitha. But I'll turn off my mic for a little bit so others can jump in.
We appreciate your insight. Thanks so much, Vonda. That perfectly gets us to the question that Sarah Pasa, policy strategist, has asked here in the chat, is that do these changes in the program create opportunities for sourcing food differently, such as sourcing more locally grown food? And we were getting ready to talk with Karen about how these fluxes in school meal programs affect farmers. So with that question in mind, Karen, would you like to share with us what this looks like on the agriculture side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And that's a perfect timing for that question, Sarah, and I'm going to wrap around to that here. But just in general, wanted to point out that 100% of foods in the school food environment, so anything that goes through the National School Lunch Program, school breakfast programs, summer feeding programs, etc., is required to be purchased from U.S. producers. So, I mean, generally, this program is intended to support American agriculture. That said, as we talked about with the end of the waiver authority, the reimbursement rates for these meals are going to go down this coming school year. So we are anticipating that schools are going to be spending probably about 40% less on some of these foods. And so farmers across the country are going to see a dramatic hit. One of the questions that someone had asked was about where does food come from for the schools? And kind of to generally talk about that, one of the streams of food that comes in is through USDA. USDA has kind of three buckets of food. There is that come through USDA foods. There is what we call brown box product, which is product that is produced and then sent out to the schools. So it might be things like could be like chicken breasts or canned vegetables, frozen fruits, things that are already packaged and ready for the schools to prepare. There is also processed foods. So there's the option for schools to order unprocessed agricultural commodities and then have them diverted to a processor to have them processed into approved products for the school meals. Those types of things can be like breakfast foods like pancakes and waffles and breakfast sandwiches. Chicken nuggets is always one of the popular ones. There is a various array of products that can be diverted to processors. And then there is the Department of Defense DoD Fresh program, which allows participating schools to order fresh produce. And all of those programs, each school is given an allocation of USDA funds that they can order against. So that is sort of the free food that comes to them, with the caveat of they do have to pay for the delivery costs for some of those things. So the processing, they have to pay for the additional costs that, for the ingredients and other costs incurred in the processing case. Then, schools are also using their funds to go out and purchase additional products. And Nicole can probably speak to that later too. But I mean, so there are the USDA products that come in, and then there are additional foods that the schools are purchasing. So, the bottom line, the reduced spending is going to dramatically impact our farmers, because they are going to see less dollars from less spending in this program. I was looking at USDA's report from, the last report they have is from fiscal year 2020. So it would be October 19 through September 2020 for purchases on the USDA foods program. So that includes not only foods that go into the school meals program, but also into the charitable food system, so like into the food banks. $1.8 billion was spent on that program. For those of you who are from Pennsylvania, farmers sold $135 million worth of product into that system. So, with reduced spending, that means Pennsylvania farmers are going to be seeing less revenue from that program too. And Pennsylvania generally ranks third or fourth out of the states in terms of total expenditures or total sales to USDA foods. So that's not just the Pennsylvania schools, but that is nationwide. Now, back to Sarah's question about local foods, there is definitely some opportunity there. And that's one of the pieces I was actually going to highlight. USDA has announced this cooperative agreement opportunity, the Local Foods for Schools program, that would basically provide funding to the states to partner with schools to provide them additional funding for local foods purchases. Pennsylvania would be eligible to apply for, I want to say it's $6.8 million worth of funding. So we are currently at Department of Agriculture working on what that type of application would look like, coordinating with Vonda and our colleagues at Department of Education. But there is certainly that opportunity for additional local foods, and so there's funding available for all 50 states for that program. Additionally, USDA just announced an additional pot of money for farm to school that they would be providing. So, I mean, I definitely think that there is some opportunity to both support our local farmers and to get additional food into the schools. But again, I think the challenge is, for our farmers is going to be that, their cost of production is so high right now too, with all of the input costs, and then, the prices that they need to charge in order to recoup their production costs, it may not fit in with the budgets necessarily of schools who, as Vonda and Nicole have talked about, operate on extremely tight margins. I think it's just going to be a volatile year for our schools, for our farmers. Yeah, I feel like Debbie Downer today. I mean, I do think for our local farmers, there are some great opportunities out there. But I do generally think this is going to be a really hard year.
It's a tough conversation. I'm glad we're all having the conversation together. Following up on that opportunity with the Food System Transformation Framework announcing that new funding, I'm curious, as we're looking toward increased procurement of locally purchased foods, from everyone on the panel, what gaps do you see that exist in that procurement process? What can we all do to ease entry into that system?
I mean, I'll say from my perspective, actually, for the local foods for schools cooperative agreement, there is no funding in there for administrative funding. And, you know, while that sounds good because 100% of the funding can then go out to the farmers, it makes it difficult because there is no funding for the state to be able to adequately put information together, put a package of recommended materials together. So we're going to be relying a lot on our partners, you know, like PASA, the Farm to School Network, et cetera, to help us develop resource guides so that we can help to get information out to the schools about, you know, vendors that they might be able to use, you know, additional requirements. If we had administrative funding, those are things that we could do in-house and we wouldn't have to rely on the kindness of our friends to do. So, I mean, I do think that those are challenges. And then quite frankly, I just think that across the board, there's just more funding needed for those types of programs. I'm not sure what Pennsylvania's share of that funding is going to be. I think it's great that USDA has put additional funding into that. But, you know, PDE, I believe, works with 800 to 900 school food authorities. So when you spread that money out amongst that many schools, the funding, you know, doesn't necessarily go that far.
And I'll just piggyback on what Karen is saying, and having very little details about the what was just announced the other day. We're not even sure if that is just limited to schools or if that includes all of the child nutrition program providers. So talking about stretching the money, we don't know how the extent to which we're going to have to stretch the money. So we have, you know, about 1,000 childcare sponsors in the state. And when we say sponsors, that's not sites. So when you talk sites, we're talking about 4,000 childcare sites in the state. When you're talking about schools, it's 950 what we call school food authorities. That's the administrative body. That's not number of sites. So you're talking about 3,000 sites of schools. So we're not talking, we're not a small state. So geographically, while we might not be as large as, you know, as California, we are by no means a small state. So absolutely delighted to hear the Biden administration plan the other day, and really anxious for details to come out. But I do, you know, one of the biggest limitations in all of this is the procurement requirements. So because these are federal dollars, there are federal regulations that have to be followed, and they're not even necessarily program specific regulations. These are they're called government-wide regulations when it comes to procurement. And the government-wide regulations require everybody utilize a certain procurement methodology to ensure fair and open competition, right? We all want that. So even if it's local, you still want it to be fairly distributed, so it doesn't become an, you know, so it doesn't become a monopoly of, you know, or based on good relationships or other important. You don't want that to be the driver, right? So those procurement requirements are very important, but they also limit being able to purchase locally. And while not a problem, as long as the purchase is under $10,000, but, you know, if you're talking an entire school year, Nicole's going to exceed that quite quickly at Great Valley School District when you start talking local purchases. So I do think that there needs to be some kind of the procurement requirements need to be evaluated to go hand in hand with this this announcement, this mission, this to make sure that it can practically be done in compliance with federal regulations.
Thank you. I'd love to hear, Tom, from your perspective, what do fluxes in school nutrition programs look like for your office and for the regional food banks in Pennsylvania?
Sure. Thank you, Tabitha. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this today. Well, I work with, as Tabitha had mentioned, Feeding Pennsylvania. We work with the 9 regional food banks covering all 67 counties in PA. But we also support the mission of reducing food and nutritional insecurity across the Commonwealth. And, these waivers certainly do impact everyone's efforts. We don't want to see children losing access to meals over the summer. And, just one more year of waivers, I think it was Nicole that had mentioned, would be great just to buy some more time to get through this inflation, get through supply chain challenges, which hopefully over one more year would be at least better. I'm not saying they'd be solved, but better. And even the waivers that just help efforts, bulk pickups rather than one meal per visit for those congregate meals, which I know was addressed earlier. It would help address nutritional needs throughout the week. One thing we certainly don't want anyone to consider is, do I spend my limited income on gas or on groceries? And this impacts those children as well. One thing I could tell after hearing everyone talk is, like a low tide lowers all ships. It certainly isn't affecting just one sector of the food industry and food service industry. Everybody's being impacted. Even people, us shopping for home at retail, we're seeing the impacts as well. So, it's logical to see challenges at the food banks when something like these waivers expire as it trickles down. The food banks, we're aware of the waivers and the summer meal programs, and they seek to complement those programs. Certainly not duplicate efforts, but work in tandem to, increase that impact. And the food banks are nonprofits, and they work with their limited budgets as well to stretch the dollars, get as much as they can in terms of product, helping their employees serve as many people as possible. And in addition to the employees, food banks and the pantry system, there's about 3,000 pantries across the state. Many of them operate part-time, and many of them rely on volunteers for their work, being open maybe 2 days a week, 2 or 3 or 4 days a week. And as volunteer service drops, we also notice that demand goes up, which is not a trend we want to see continue, but it's a challenge that impacts the food banks as well. And the food banks certainly have the normal human resource issues, finding, hiring, and retaining employees, staff, drivers that are getting, really competitive for their service, high diesel prices to distribute product throughout the regions, which I'm sure, trickles down both to deliveries and getting product around school districts as well to the various schools. And then high food costs to supplement donations. Food banks, one common saying is never say no. Try to take all donations as they come available. But now there's, people are really considering what's the cost of the pickup for a donation. Is it worth it? I still don't know if anybody's saying no, but it's really starting to become a consideration. So in summary, the food banks just work to supplement and complement these programs. And we're supportive of all the efforts for Karen and Vonda and Nicole's colleagues. And we just want to help them. All students and their families, meet their nutritional needs.
Thank you, Tom. And thanks for reaching out to Sarah and getting this conversation started. We are going to discuss now. I saw a question in the chat, which is perfect. It was on our agenda for discussion anyway. The Farm Bill is due for reauthorization in 2023. What is needed from the Farm Bill to empower schools and food access agencies to feed kids and other folks in Pennsylvania? I'd love to hear thoughts from all of our speakers. Please feel free to jump in any order. A follow-up question from the chat here is, has Pennsylvania historically received, and I'm paraphrasing, has Pennsylvania historically received its full share of Farm Bill funding, and are the programs funded addressing the current needs?
So I can start here. In terms of, is Pennsylvania getting its fair share of funding? I would say yes. Under the current administration, it is. And I think that answer largely depends on the administration in charge, because if certain states don't take advantage of certain options, then they don't draw down some of the funding that's available. But I will say that I think that the Wolf administration has made it a priority to address food insecurity issues, and was particularly engaged in these issues at the height of the COVID pandemic. So I would say, to the extent that funding is available for Pennsylvania for programs, like SNAP, like farm to school programs, TFAP, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, the Senior Food Box Program, Farmers Market Nutrition Programs, yes, Pennsylvania is getting its fair share. Do I think that there's enough funding? I mean, as a former advocate, I will tell you, no, there's never enough funding. There can always be more funding, because there are still more than 1.5 million people across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania who are not always sure where their next meal is coming from. So, I mean, certainly there are improvements that can be made to the SNAP program to increase benefit adequacy. There are changes that can be made to ensure that college students have access to benefits, to remove some of the restrictions on able-bodied adults without dependents, to remove some of the draconian restrictions on immigrants, etc. I mean, I think in terms of child nutrition programs, it's a little bit more difficult, because generally the Senate Agriculture Committee and the House Agriculture Committee try not to put too many child nutrition programs into the Farm Bill, because child nutrition programs are expected to be included in the child nutrition reauthorization. Where that becomes difficult, of course, is that Congress hasn't actually reauthorized the child nutrition reauthorization in 12 years now. Hence the push to try to include child nutrition provisions into the Farm Bill. I mean, I think the opportunities for us to directly address child nutrition in the Farm Bill, again, I think it goes to SNAP, because if you can improve SNAP benefit adequacy for families, you're improving the nutrition that children can get at home. Right now we know that the majority of children, quite frankly, rely on the meals that they get at school, and those are some of the most nutritious meals that they get, and maybe the only meals that they get are the meals that they get at school. And that's why it's so critical to be able to shore up the summer food service programs, because it's really hard for kids to access that. I'm not sure what the percentage is right now, but I know it used to be somewhere around only 10% of kids who were eligible for free and reduced price meals during the school year actually benefited from summer feeding programs, just because the lack of availability, lack of transportation, etc. So, improving SNAP is one way. And then, certainly a lot of initiatives for farm to school are embedded within the Farm Bill, just because of the linkage with production agriculture. So I think those are opportunities within the Farm Bill itself to help address child nutrition.
just to add on to, and sort of just put an exclamation mark behind what Karen is saying, is it's really the child nutrition reauthorization that the child nutrition programs depend on. So the child nutrition programs are entitlement programs, which means the funding has to be there. If the number of meals served goes up, there's not cut off per se, so they're not block granted programs. So the federal funding has to be there for the number of meals that are served. What that doesn't account for, though, is what the reimbursement per meal is. So while the number of free meals, served in the state might increase, the reimbursement rate for each meal stays the same, because that's what's written into law. And while it's adjusted every year based on inflationary indexes, you have to look at that. Is the baseline sufficient to cover the cost? That's up for a conversation. The Farm Bill is tremendously beneficial for providing sort of opportunities, I think is the word Karen used, those opportunities to enhance the programs and provide sort of supplementary things that can go along with the program, like farm to school. And I believe that's where the fresh fruit and vegetable program was born out of, if my memory serves me correctly from many, many years ago. So, and while it's been expanded through, different types of measures and bills. I do want to back up to one question, though, that was asked very early on, and Karen did a nice job of answering the question, but it's the one in the Q&A about where do schools get their foods from? And while the USDA foods are so very important to the program, Karen, what did we figure out the other week? It was like the USDA foods entitlement accounts for 20%, something along that line.
It's somewhere between 20 and 30. I mean, it's a fraction compared to what the schools have to go out and purchase themselves. Yes.
Yeah. So Karen had mentioned about schools going out to purchase the food themselves. So whatever they cannot, whatever is not funded through the USDA foods, the schools have to go out and procure that, source it from the Cisco's, from the US Foods, from the local buying cooperatives, from local farmer networks, from local farmers individually. And so there is a tremendous amount of opportunity outside of USDA foods for procuring foods. And Nicole can speak to this better than anyone. It's a complicated system to procure and get enough food for the number of mouths they're being fed.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to speak on the Farm Bill and items we'd like to see there to support school nutrition programs? Just wanted to create a little space for that. It sounds like, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add one small thing, with Feeding PA and the nutritional support. One push has been on for the food banks and those who visit, also growing your own. And I know the farm to school has an educational component. When someone just put in the chat, cooking, but also growing your own and getting kids. Well, we talk to audiences in general, but certainly kids to, consider that at home or a community garden. If they get engaged, and they might get encouraged to consume those healthy products that they grow. It might not move the needle greatly, but certainly every little bit helps, and it could be a sustainable effort for some individuals.
Thank you, Tom. It sounds like there are plenty of opportunities for us to continue to collaborate and work together to increase the odds of success in applications for and implementation of farm to school funds. I'd like for each of you to share a call to action to the folks that are listening here with us today, but also to folks who might see this recording in the future. If there's something you haven't shared yet that you'd like to share, as far as what can we do to help support these programs and initiatives and the funding that props them up.
So I'll jump in here and share that the White House is currently preparing to host the first conference on hunger and nutrition that has happened since the Nixon administration. So it's a pretty big deal. They have been hosting some listening sessions, and I know I participated in one last night. I think they still have a few going on. They are also taking written comments, and they're preparing for their full conference later this fall. I would encourage everyone to join one of the listening sessions or submit comments on things that need to be done. They're looking for any ideas, big or small, things that came out of the last White House conference were, major changes to the child nutrition programs, to the SNAP program, to WIC. Substantial changes to these programs. And I think that is the hope that, some major initiatives could come out of this as well. I will share that two of the recommendations that I put forward last night. One is that we need to have universal free school meals. I think that, the last 2 years have shown the importance of that. And I think that is something that's critical. And then one of the other things that I recommended pertaining to summer meals is that they should consider removing the congregate requirement, because it's really hard, particularly in rural areas, but also, quite frankly, in urban and suburban areas where it may not be safe for kids to travel to the sites, and where there may be limited numbers of sites for them to access the meals. For them to have to travel to these locations every single day to consume a meal, whenever schools have proved that they were able to, do like a once a week package for like grab and go meals, where they could prepare meals for the kids to take home that could be prepared. I think that, while it is great to have those congregate meals and to have kids engaged in on-site activities where it works, it doesn't work everywhere. And quite frankly, I think for low-income kids, it is more important to make sure that they have meals as opposed to, consuming a meal on site every day. So those are two of the recommendations that I shared last night. But I think that there is ample opportunity for comments to go in, and the White House is encouraging that. And if I can find the link for that, I will share that.
I would just add to that, Karen, I think those are two huge things. Summer meals would be done a lot more if we could do it as a non-congregate. My call to action is really to start contacting and tell your stories to the legislators, farmers, school food service directors, food bank workers. We have to tell the legislators what's going on, and we need to communicate that to parents in the community. I sat down and was looking at our numbers for the meals that we did this year. We did a 66% increase in school breakfast when it was free, which is tremendous, and just shows the importance of school breakfast alone. SNAPA's school meals for all task force just went to with PASBO. We're hoping to get a meeting with appropriations to try to get breakfast covered. When you see numbers like that in a district, you were seeing it across the state, the importance of breakfast. I mean, I don't eat breakfast until I get to work. I send my daughter to daycare with her breakfast packed. So the ability for kids to eat breakfast when they get to school is important. And we're clearly seeing that it's needed based on the numbers. I also just want to talk a little bit about procurement with farmers. And I think one of the biggest things I can say is if there are farmers who are looking to sell to schools, they have to reach out to schools. I've seen different farmers, apple farmers have worked it out to be able to work with schools. I know Vonda Bald Eagle School District comes to mind. From back in the day, they had gotten potatoes from schools. I know or from farms. We have had a very successful relationship with our food bank to run farm to our own garden for many years. The Chester County Food Bank supported that through their raised bed initiative. So procurement of local foods can be difficult, but it's possible. Doing micro purchasing and really just having conversations with your food service in your schools is going to be important to see what's possible. So I encourage those conversations to happen as well. And I think PASA and the Farm to School Network is an excellent springboard to launch those conversations. So I think that those are my calls to action.
I can go next, and I have a couple, and I'll try to keep them short. So, my first call to action would be either fully fund the full cost to actually practically produce a meal for children in these programs, and that goes across all child nutrition programs, or generate awareness that the reimbursement itself does not fully fund and that there is a need for additional funding, not through the pocket of children to have to sell a la carte foods and generate funds in other ways. So that will be my one call to action, that if these programs, not if, I know they are, but if these programs are important for children, then let's find a way to fully fund them to the degree that it covers the cost to produce them and serve them. I agree, with what Karen said about free meals for all students, all children, and I come from like a different perspective on that, and that's really about the stigma associated, or eliminating the stigma associated. There's lots of debate, right, about whether we need to provide free meals for families that can afford them, but the benefit truly is for the children that cannot afford them, because it eliminates, in fact, the stigma associated with the meals, the child nutrition program meals. So that is sort of my primary driver in believing that there should be free meals for all children. And then my last call to action is that we really need to take a look at the procurement requirements, because if we really want to become more dependent on a local food network, we have to eliminate the procurement barriers associated with that and make it easier to do that procurement. And I'll just put a plug out there for the Pennsylvania Farm to Child Nutrition Summit that is occurring on June 23rd. Last I heard, it was either very close to full or there could be a waiting list now. So I'm a little reluctant to put that out there, because I don't want to be like, oh yeah, let's talk about this, but no, you can't go. But it's a summit to really facilitate that peer-to-peer connection and learning about child nutrition practices as it relates to farm to table, whatever table that might be in the child nutrition program.
Sure. And on the food bank side with Feeding Pennsylvania, I'll just encourage any farmers, producers, community members that are interested in getting involved, you can reach out to your local pantry or your local food bank. You can always contact myself at Feeding Pennsylvania, and we can find local. And I'd like to think that these topics are non-controversial. Everyone getting 3 square meals a day, but as you know, that's not it's not always as simple as that. So, we're willing to do what we can to help everyone out, reduce that stigma, certainly, as Vonda had mentioned, on the food bank side, and anyone that's interested in helping out or passing along information that can help individuals meet their nutritional needs, please feel free to do so, or feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Has everyone had a chance to share their call to action? Okay, great. Thank you so much to our speakers. This is pretty perfect timing. We're right at 1 p.m. and we were planning to wrap up. If there are any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to reach out to our panelist or to me. I can forward those to our panelist. I will share my email in the chat here. And definitely visit our websites. You can sign up for newsletters there to get information on these topics as they evolve. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. We will have this discussion available as a recording, and that will be posted on PASA's website. We'll get that to everyone who spoke here today as well, and we'll share that out broadly. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.